Some things you just can't, or at least shouldn't, bring home. I parked my 2012 Mustang GT in the parking lot behind the bar, looking for a few moments of relaxation. I was so angry with the pressures of the day that I would have been sorry to bring this anger home to my beautiful wife. She already had enough stress in her life trying to raise our 3 terrifying little boys. She didn't need me to add to it. When I get home, I should be happy and ready to spend time with her, not taking out the frustration that has built up after 8 hours or more of hanging out with assholes. As I walked into the slightly darkened bar, some of the regulars greeted me. It was one of those places where everyone knew your name and you were always happy to come here. It was one of those friendly neighborhood-type bars, and to be honest, it was only a few blocks from my house. My main problem was communicating with union representatives. It seemed their only goal in life was to slow down production. Perhaps in their minds, the more they slow things down, the better for their people. I wish at least one of them was smart enough to realize that the slower they work, the less money we make, and that includes them. When they asked for higher salaries or benefits, it was difficult to justify when profits were falling. What idiots they are. And they were all so narcissistic. There wasn't a single team player among them. If I didn't have a mortgage and 2 car loans and my 3 spoiled kids, I would walk out the damn door and never look back at this place. But who am I kidding? I was trapped. My job paid well, and the job of running the plant wasn't all that difficult. The economic situation was also so bad that if I left there, it would be difficult for me to find another job at the same level. My mother didn't raise fools, so I'll stay and bear it. I raised my hand and the sweet bartender, whose name I could never remember, brought me a cold Dos Equis Amber. Before I even took a sip from the first bottle, I already ordered the next one. I don't always drink beer, but when I do, I drink a hell of a lot of it. As I took my first sip from the bottle and looked around the room, I saw a woman walking from table to table. Most of the guys turned her down and she moved on to the next table. I knew she wouldn't last long here. The owner, Murray, loved to keep his place clean. Women could drink and party here just like anyone else, but he didn't allow anyone to look for work in his bar. As she approached the last table and headed towards the bar, I noticed that her body was once magnificent, but time and a hard life had taken its toll. Her breasts were still beautiful, but she walked bent over, as if the whole weight of the world was on her fragile shoulders. Life has hit this woman hard. I immediately felt pity for her, without even seeing her face. As she walked over to a chair a couple steps away from me, I heard her ask the guy sitting there if she could sit down. In bar slang, when a woman asks if she can sit down or asks a man to buy her a drink, it carries a certain implication. And most of these guys, like me, happily married, would never accept such an invitation. It sounds innocent and harmless, but one thing can quickly lead to another. And now you're sliding down a slippery slope that ends in a place where you don't want to be. As I sat there drinking my beer and letting all the tension melt away, she came closer and closer to me. She must have been very desperate to simply move from chair to chair, propositioning every man in the bar. Murray's voice was heard right in front of me. "Hey, get out of here, and don't come back. I keep my place clean. My clients come here to drink and relax. They don't need or want anything else." He turned on the Lions preseason game and headed toward his office in the back. It was pretty tough. She silently but diligently walked around the bar. She wasn't overtly obvious about her intentions and didn't wear a ton of makeup or wear a dress that showed off her breasts or butt. I could barely contain my smile, but I was also pretty relieved that she was caught before she got to me. To be honest, I have never spoken to such a woman in my life. I started to wonder if I was really glad it didn't get to me or if I was just a little sad. What would she ask me? How would I answer her? Would I be disgusted to be around her? Or would I be a little excited? "Sorry," she said to Murray's retreating back. All the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. The voice was older and sounded like she'd been through hell and back, but I recognized it immediately now. She looked at me and her mouth fell open at the same moment as mine. Our gazes met, and recognition gave way to memories. I went back to the first time I saw her. I was in 10th grade. Oh, what a child I was. It was the middle of the school year when she walked into my class. I still remember when my teacher, Mrs. Ethel Mertz, introduced her to the class. "Tell them your name, dear," Mrs. Mertz said. "Felicia Thomas," she said shyly. I fainted. Her voice was so musical that it sounded as if she was singing. Her face looked like she was halfway between an angel and a pin-up girl. I was in 10th grade, so we were pretty innocent back then. There was no sex, at least I did not participate in it and did not know about it. Of course, we knew about sex, but no one was doing it. Good kids just didn't do those things in my day. It could be that a kiss or two was occasionally exchanged on someone's porch. But that was all. Before Felicia arrived, everyone knew who the pretty girls in our class were, but we weren't really interested in how they were made. Perhaps it was simply because we all grew up together and went through school together, so most of the girls in the class developed slowly before our eyes. But from the first second I saw Felicia, I understood why women are built this way. Of course, being on the smaller side and the smarter side, as well as the quieter side, I never really got a chance to talk to her much. However, I was a member of her fan club just like everyone else. The athletes tried to impress her with their athletic prowess and aggressiveness. Tough guys and smart guys tried to impress her with their toughness or their tricks, but she didn't pay attention to it. I watched everything she did throughout 10th, 11th, and half of 12th grade. Summer was the worst time of the year for me. I hated summer holidays and could hardly wait to get back to school to see her. I went to school every day. I memorized all her clothes. To show you how obsessed I was, there were several girls in class who liked me, and I ignored them all due to my obsession with Felicia. Kathy Sanders reprimanded me about how stupid I was. Katia was quite a nice girl. She was not a princess, and she was not a frog. She was just a sweet, ordinary girl. She had a very cute face and a good body. There was only one problem with her. She wasn't Felicia. If Felicia didn't exist, Katie Sanders would rule our school. Even the cheerleaders couldn't compare to Felicia. Comparing an ordinary 18-year-old girl to Felicia Thomas was like comparing Marilyn Monroe to a camp girl. It was almost as if they just weren't the same species. Katie asked me to go to one of the dances with her, and I looked at her like she was crazy. I didn't mean to be rude, but the thought of dating anyone other than Felicia was foreign to me. I didn't even know what to tell her. There was an awkward pause, and then she said it to my face. "So you'd rather go to the dance alone and watch Felicia from across the room if she even shows up, rather than go there with someone who actually knows you're alive and likes you?" she asked. I think I nodded, but I'm not sure. "What a loser you are," Katie hissed, walking away and leaving me standing in the hallway in front of half of our class. During our last year, we traveled a lot and participated in various activities. One of these trips was to Cedar Point, a famous amusement park in Ohio. We had to travel 2 hours by bus to get there. I intended to have a fun day. I had enough money to spend and a few friends to have fun with. We had already decided what we wanted to see and do in the park. Little did I know that real life was going to change my plans. I was one of the first on the bus and took a seat in the middle of the bus to wait for my friends. I knew the jocks and popular kids would be all together in the back, and I really didn't want to deal with them. I also knew that the nerds and scared kids would be at the front of the bus, hoping for protection and freedom from the attention of the meaner kids. I didn't want to be a part of it either. The middle of the bus was practically unnoticed, so I sat there. As the bus started to fill up, I saw my friend Mike's mom's minivan pull into the parking lot. Mike's mom had one problem. She was very absent-minded and always late. But if you looked at her, you wouldn't care. All she had to do was smile and all was forgiven. She was the Felicia of her generation. This time, however, they were not late. They were among the last to arrive, but there were still empty seats on the bus. There were 2 seats next to me and several in front and behind. I saw my friends Mike and Steve get out of the car and walk towards the bus. As soon as they got on the bus, my plans changed. It was as if there was silence when Felicia entered the bus. She smiled slightly, and several people waved at her. Some of the athletes at the back of the bus made room for her, and almost every guy there opened his mouth in surprise. Okay, I watched it too. I couldn't help but do it. and I'm sure my mouth opened as wide as every other guy's. But the last couple of weeks, I've been paying attention to other things besides Felicia. I was about to leave for college and had a summer job. I had my whole life ahead of me, and it was time to start focusing on my future rather than my fantasy girlfriend. Essentially, adulthood began to call me. It was time to put the baby things aside. Seeing Felicia dressed for a summer outing was certainly not a child's thing. It's just impossible to explain. There were many girls dressed almost provocatively, but they could not compare with her. Felicia was wearing a halter top. They were fashionable at the time. Most of the girls wore some sort of crop top or halter top. But in Felicia's case, the way her large breasts simply jutted out from underneath her ribcage was stunning. Her waist narrowed and then widened, creating that hourglass shape that never goes out of style. Her shorts were skimpy, but the legs that came out of them were incredible. Every detail of her body was feminine perfection. She walked down the aisle of the bus and then carefully sat down in the empty seat right next to me. I was amazed, as were my friends who were right behind her, and were surprised when she sat down next to me, disrupting our plans at least for the duration of the trip. Mike smiled at me and shrugged before he and Steve headed to the empty seats. When the bus started moving, I found somewhere to look outside the window. Less than 5 minutes into the journey, she began. "You'll be biting your elbows tomorrow," she laughed. I had no idea who or what she was talking about, so I continued to look out the window. Hearing her voice so close was intoxicating. "What a missed opportunity," she continued. I turned around to see who she was talking to and found her looking at me. I spent months and years watching her from afar, but seeing her so close was simply too much. Up close, I could see every little line and wrinkle on her face. I could see little freckles and imperfections. Her brown eyes had little green flecks, and they were stunning. All the many differences between one side of her symmetrical face and the other made her look more real. And incredibly, the flaws only added to her perfection. The strangest thing was that she knew it. "The girls always talk to each other," she said. "I've been told more than once that you spend a lot of time looking at me." Oh yes, she knew. And incredibly, it was okay for her. "Why?" she asked. Indeed, words were not needed. The look in my eyes said it all. We just looked at each other for a very long moment that seemed like an eternity. "Oh," she said, "I felt like Icarus. I was too close to the sun. I had to look away from the flames or melt from its fury. When I tried to look away, she grabbed my chin and held my gaze. "No," she smiled. "I need you to get used to seeing me. We can't have fun today if you can't feel comfortable with me." What the hell did she mean? We? Did she really mean her and me? How the hell could this work? She was this goddess and I was just a regular guy. It just couldn't happen. Heaven would not allow this to happen. "Can I ask you something?" she asked. "Of course, about anything," I said. "Why didn't you ever talk to me?" she asked. I blushed again. I started to look away again to hide my embarrassment, and she leveled my face in front of her again. "I guess I could try to tell you something too," she said. "But you're so damn smart. You're glowing. You know the answers to all the questions all the time. Did you know that most of the girls in our class think you're cute and everyone knows you'll be successful one day? You'll have a big house and a long car and all that?" No," I stopped her. "I'll definitely always drive a Mustang." "How are all the pictures in your locker?" she asked. I blushed again. "Yeah, I'm watching a little too." She smiled. Then she did it. She raised the armrest between us and lowered it between the seats, turning our two separate seats into one long one. Then she took my hand and wrapped hers around it. She laid her head on my shoulder and closed her eyes. I felt so many different things at that moment. On the one hand, I felt strong and confident for the first time. I felt that I had to protect the most precious thing in the world from all the aliens. On the other hand, I felt like I was going to explode with happiness. It seemed to me that everyone on the bus was looking at us. In reality, however, it was only one person. Katie Sanders looked at us with fury in her eyes. As soon as we arrived at the park, I carefully woke up Felicia. Her smile when she opened her eyes made my heart soar. "Are we there yet?" she asked. The slight hoarseness in her voice made her even more dear to me. As we got off the bus and entered the park, she refused to let go of my hand. I observed everything and everyone around me. For some reason, my curiosity about how all my classmates perceived the vision of Felicia and I together overpowered my desire to explore the park. I have seen and heard different reactions, from the curiosity on many faces to the approving nods from my two best friends who were clearly happy for me and didn't hold it against me for letting them down. Perhaps the strangest reaction then came from Katie Sanders. I actually heard her say, "Fucking bitch." I was too happy to try to figure out what her problem was, so Felicia and I got down to business, having fun. We rode the rides, starting with the fun ones and working our way up to the big, scary roller coasters that Cedar Point is so famous for. Sure, sometimes you had to wait in long lines to get on roller coasters like Blue Streak or Demon Drop, but even that was special. If someone had told me that I would enjoy standing in line for almost an hour for a 2-minute ride, I would have thought they were crazy. But standing in line with Felicia was more special than the skating itself. We talked all the time, and I never got tired of listening to her. We ate, played games, walked, and did everything we could do. We bought souvenirs and t-shirts and changed into them. We walked holding hands, as if we had been a couple for a long time. It was a perfect morning and afternoon. Unfortunately, by mid-afternoon I ran out of money. I spent a lot of the money I earned in the fall and winter on mowing lawns and doing other odd jobs. Felicia and I blew almost $150 in less than 4 hours. We sat there for a few awkward moments and then came across a group of kids from our school who decided to eat. Felicia decided to join them. One of the guys offered to pay for her food. When they left, I felt like an egg dropped from the top of the Empire State Building. I started out almost as high as the clouds, only to fall from those heights to the cold, hard ground below. I felt terrible. In fact, terrible didn't even begin to describe how I felt. I met the surprise quintet of Mike, Steve, Holly, Sarah, and Katie Sanders as a fifth wheel. They all approached me as I made my suicide march back to the bus to spend the last 2 hours depressed and alone. "Where's your girlfriend?" Katie asked mockingly. "She's hanging out with other people," I said quietly. "When did she decide to do this?" she asked. "Let me guess, around the time you ran out of money, right?" "Don't worry, Jerry. Just come with us," Steve said. "Yes," everyone else agreed. "Thanks, guys," I said sadly. "But I'm just not in the mood. See you on the bus." "Wait, Jerry," Katie said. I didn't wait to hear what she had to say. I needed to get out of there before my friends saw me cry like a baby. As I was leaving, I heard them talking. "It's cruel," Mike said. "Poor guy," Steve said. As much as I thought I would, I didn't cry, sitting there on the bus and thinking. I was going through a lot of different feelings in my head. I felt betrayed. I also felt pain. I guess that's what heartbreak feels like. But at the same time, thinking back on it, I asked myself if it was worth it. Was the pain I felt at the end of the day a fair price to pay for the delight with which I started? I guess, looking back, I have to say yes. Hell yeah, actually. 4 or 5 hours with my dream girl on my arm was worth 2 hours of heartbreak any day. In fact, it was a fitting way to leave those childhood dreams behind. I think everyone at some point in their life will get kicked in the teeth and have to pick themselves up. We are measured as men and women not by our ability to be knocked down by the hardships of life and love, but by our ability to rise from them. I walked away from that heartbreak, battered and bruised, but also stronger and tougher, albeit a little less open and a lot less innocent. My happiness continued when my friends and their new girlfriends were among the first to return to the bus. When I pretended to be asleep, they surrounded me and wrapped me in a cocoon of compassion. Less than 10 minutes later, Felicia was back on the bus with a group of people from the back of the bus. As she walked past me, carried away by one of the big guys who had one of his massive arms around her possessively, she glanced at me. A strange feeling was written on her face. I couldn't tell if it was regret or guilt, but I pretended I was still asleep. Over the next few days at school, I heard all sorts of stories about what had happened in the last 2 hours at the park. I heard that Brad Jameson kissed Felicia several times. I also heard that he was moving his hands all over her body. I pretended that I was no longer interested, but in reality, every new story and rumor tore my heart apart over and over again. Of course, an environment like school is relatively small and contained, so inevitably we bumped into each other a few times before the school year mercifully ended. And for some reason, sparks kept flying every time our eyes met. She would often try to start a conversation, and I would always just politely nod and say, "Hi," before leaving on some made-up errand before she could say anything. There were a few times when she tried to back me into a corner, but usually the forces of the universe that had conspired to give us this perfect morning conspired to keep us apart in the form of either Katie or one of the massive guys who, for some reason seemed to be following her now. Her last futile attempt came on our graduation day. As soon as we stepped off the stage with the fruits of 4 years of toil and maturation, she grabbed me and uttered the words that no man, even recently released from the cocoon of boyhood, wants to hear. "This nonsense has been going on too long, Jerry," she said. "We need to talk, and we need to do it now, before it's too late." I was like a deer in the headlights in front of her seemingly righteous fury. "If anyone is going to talk, it will be between us," Katie Sanders hissed. "Get your ass away from him." I took this moment to, in the words of Snuggly Puss, exit left, and returned to my parents and friends who had come to watch me graduate. We went out to a great dinner, and I barely thought about Felicia during the summer. I worked hard that summer. I worked different shifts and saved enough money to buy my first car. I purchased a used 1988 Ford Mustang GT 5.0. It was red. He was hot, and he was my next true love, and the first of my true loves that was faithful to me. In the last few weeks before leaving for college, my car and I really went to a lot of places. I heard from friends that Felicia was desperately trying to find me. In fact, one of the guys who worked across the street from the plant where I worked gave me her phone number. He knew her family and promised to give me her number. I took it out of politeness and just threw it away as soon as it was gone. I still had feelings for her, but I realized that everything between us was more of a fantasy than something sustainable. My car gave me more self-confidence, and I had strong ideas about what I wanted in a woman. And although she was still my fantasy, Felicia didn't fit that role in real life. I often wondered what she wanted to tell me that was so important. I just didn't think about it enough to actually want to hear it. My experience with her taught me several valuable lessons, not the least of which was that I needed someone in my life who I could rely on for everything, not just when everything was good. Any woman who runs off with another guy as soon as the money runs out is not my type. I left for college without seeing her again. I didn't know what school she went to and hoped she didn't know anything about mine. Of course, I went to Michigan. It was close enough to get home every weekend or even during the week if I had an emergency. And, of course, I never made it home until Thanksgiving and then again for Christmas. I was so busy studying and starting a social life in Ann Arbor that I simply couldn't find the time to come home. When spring arrived, Mike, Steve, and I went to Florida together to unwind a little. We had fun and never mentioned the school or anyone we knew there. Summer came and I got an internship at Ford. I was too busy and too tired to do anything other than work, eat, and sleep during the week. But on the weekends I relaxed, within reason. I sometimes met and spent time with friends. No one saw or heard from Felicia and I didn't care. There were rumors that she was in the hospital, but again, it just didn't generate enough interest for me to even ask about it. I went back to school in the fall and occasionally dated a girl or two here and there, but there was really nothing serious in my life other than school and my car. The following summer, I was 20 years old and, armed with an associate's degree, I got a much better position at a manufacturing plant a few miles outside of Detroit. I made very good money, even if it was only for the summer. I went to several parties with Mike and Steve. We'd just hear about someone throwing a party and jump in my Mustang and go there. This happened at one of these events on Friday evening. As usual, I was observing my surroundings and sometimes pretending that I knew how to dance, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Why didn't you call me, Jerry?" There was no need to turn around. I knew from the sound of the voice who it was, and the goosebumps all over my body only reminded me of how I once felt about her. But during these 2 years, I grew and matured and was confident that I could handle it. So I turned to face her and found that, as usual, I was unprepared for her. Of course, I've grown a little and gained a few good pounds. My voice became deeper, and I became more confident. But Felicia? It's simply impossible to describe it. She was radiant. She was so beautiful that it hurt me to look at her. If it was possible, her breasts became even fuller, and her hips widened a little, making her look more mature, more feminine. Her legs were still curved and beautiful. As usual, she was just on a different level of maturity compared to all the other girls around us. She was just a woman among girls. There was something else about her. There was also something different about her, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. "You know, I thought we had something special," she said. "What's happened?" I just snorted. Either her memory is selective, or she thought I was stupid. "It was nice to see you again, Felicia." I started, and she exploded. This time, Katie wasn't there to protect me. "I've been trying for 2 years to appease you, or at least talk to you," she screamed. "All I wanted to know was why you rejected me. Even the worst criminal in the world deserves to know what he's guilty of. Damn, is it so hard to just pay attention to me and talk to me?" Everyone at the party turned to look at us. "Fuck you, Jerry. All this time I thought you were different. I thought you were special. I clung to this fantasy about us. And now I see that that's exactly what it was." Her voice grew louder as she spoke. In the end, I just grabbed her hand and pulled her outside. She didn't resist at all. I pulled her out to my car, opened the passenger door, and pushed her inside. She crossed her legs and rested her head on the soft black leather of the seat. She smiled and put her hand on mine, which was on the gear shift when I drove away from the party. I drove to a secluded spot across from the same lake where the party we had just left was at. But we were there alone, far from prying eyes and ears. She smiled at me again. "That's much better, Jerry," she said. "Felicia, are you worried?" I asked. "We don't know each other anymore. We haven't seen each other in a couple of years and haven't spoken in even longer. Nobody knows where we are. What about your friends? They don't even know you left the party. Anything could have happened to you. Jerry, I have no friends. I was at the party alone. I only came to the party to see you. I'm where I'm supposed to be. Besides, you would never hurt me. You still love me, even after the last 2 years of our separation. We just need to solve our little problem," she said. "What the hell are you talking about?" I asked. "We spent part of one day together while we were at school. I spent the whole morning dreaming about you and spending money on you until I ran out of money. Then you left with the first guy you met who still had money left to wasting it on you. Any feelings I might have had for you disappeared then. All I got for my efforts was pain, suffering, and humiliation for the rest of the school year. And I had to constantly listen to stories about how, what have you been doing with Brad since you left me? How much of this sounds like love to you? If this is love, then I don't need it. Is this really what you thought?" she asked. "You're an asshole and a mess. I didn't leave you for Brad, you fool. I left Brad for you. Brad was kind of my boyfriend at the time, and he paid for my trip. I decided to spend this day with you because you really don't understand any of this, do you? Maybe I'm the only one who felt it. Maybe you're just like everyone else. You're just fascinated by my boobs and don't really care about the rest." Her face turned red, and I saw tears forming in the corners of her eyes. "That's it," she said. As I watched, she began to unbutton her shirt. "I guess that's all I am." I grabbed her hand and stopped her. "What are you doing?" she hissed. "Would you like to see them? There's no one here. Maybe you were planning to have sex with me. I hope you have a blanket in the car." I just looked at her in shock. "I hope at least you won't tell everyone after we do this. That's why I don't have any friends right now," she said, big tears rolling down her cheeks. I was shocked. This was news to me. "For your information, I didn't leave you in that stupid park. I went with Brad for one reason. I wanted to borrow money from him so you and I could spend the rest of our time together. Brad acted like a jerk around his friends. He had to appear tough in front of them, but in private, he was normal, she said. He kept telling me that we would just go on one ride and then I could leave. He could only give me $20. I decided that was enough. We already bought souvenirs and all the rides were paid for with our bracelets. You know. I still have that t-shirt you bought me. I only wear it when I'm sad. And of course I can't wear it in public. Why? I asked. She looked at me and smiled, shaking her head. Jerry, honey, my, curves are a lot bigger than they used to be. Believe me, if you were jealous of Brad, you wouldn't want me wearing this t-shirt in front of anyone but you, she said. Anyway, he kept telling me about another trip until I finally gave up and went looking for you. He came with me, and when I couldn't find you, I gave up and went with him and his friends. And yes, he did try to grab my tits and my ass, because that's what men do, isn't it? And that was one of the things that made me realize that you were the one I should be with. Jerry, you treated me like a person. And not only that, but you treated me like a person who meant something to you. Even when I rubbed my chest against your hand, I could see that you liked it, but you didn't try to take advantage of me. He kept telling me that we would just go on one ride and then I could leave. He could only give me $20. I decided that was enough. We already bought souvenirs and all the rides were paid for with our bracelets. You know? I still have that t-shirt you bought me. I only wear it when I'm sad. And of course I can't wear it in public. Why? I asked. She looked at me and smiled, shaking her head. Jerry, honey, my, curves are a lot bigger than they used to be. Believe me, if you were jealous of Brad, you wouldn't want me wearing this t-shirt in front of anyone but you, she said. Anyway, he kept telling me about another trip until I finally gave up and went looking for you. He came with me, and when I couldn't find you, I gave up and went with him and his friends. And yes, he did try to grab my tits and my ass because that's what men do, isn't it? And that was one of the things that made me realize that you were the one I should be with. Jerry, you treated me like a person. And not only that, but you treated me like a person who meant something to you. Even when I rubbed my chest against your hand, I could see that you liked it, but you didn't try to take advantage of me. It just confirmed what I thought we both felt when we first looked into each other's eyes. But now I see that I felt it alone, she said. I'm sorry to bother you. This won't happen again. This is just another example of my stupidity and jumping to conclusions. Can you please take me home or at least back to the party? I can probably catch a taxi back from there or take a bus. I've been left on the road a couple of times now and it's never been pleasant, she said. We returned to my car and I drove in silence, thinking about what she had said. While returning to the party, her hand quietly moved to mine, but I didn't say anything. Finally, it just came out of me in a rush of quick words and sighs. You weren't alone, Felicia, I said. I was crazy about you from the first time I saw you. That was 2 years before Cedar Point. Most of the things you heard about the way I looked at you don't even begin to tell the whole story. I gave up the opportunity to go to prom with Katie Sanders because it wasn't you. She covered her mouth and sighed. No wonder she hated me so much, she smiled. I think that's why I got hurt so bad, I said. I've never been particularly religious. I think you were the closest I've ever come to worshiping something. So that day in the park was like a dream come true. She blushed and turned away from me. We were interrupted by a beep from my wrist. What was it? She asked. This is my go to bed so you can get to work alarm clock, I said sadly. I have a summer job as an assistant production manager at a factory out of town. If I can get a job at that level after college, I'll easily make $100,000 a year. So I'll have to do a good job for them to hire me after I graduate. Jerry, can we start over? She asked. I know I ruined everything, but I really want us to be together. We belong together. I was stunned. I couldn't believe she said that. Before I could answer, she moved closer in the seat and kissed me. Although it was just a modest kiss on the lips, I felt as if my head had exploded. She squeezed my hand and rubbed those big, soft breasts against me, like she did that day at the park, and I melted. Everything I thought I had learned simply melted away, and I was conquered again. Honey, we need to have a serious talk tomorrow. There's no time tonight. but there are a few mistakes in my life that you need to know about before you give me an answer. I want to be completely honest with you, but Jerry, you need to know that I have only loved one man all my life, and that is you," she said. I nodded woodenly as she said all the right things. I dropped her off at her cheap apartment on the first floor instead of a party and left so I could get home and get a few hours of sleep before work. My Mustang was fast, but I could have flown home even faster on the wings of love. The entire next day at work, nothing could unsettle me. I was happier than I had ever been in my life, except for the day at Cedar Point. I finished work earlier than I told her, and although I stopped and bought her flowers, I arrived at her apartment an hour before I promised. I bought her flowers to show her that despite what she thought, I still cared about her. No matter what was going on in her life, it wouldn't matter as long as we were together. I decided if I arrived too early, I would just wait for her in front of her apartment. I planned for us to go to a nice restaurant so she could tell me her story in a comfortable environment while we ate. I have already seen us together in my mind and heart. I think it was like when my father taught me to box. I became so caught up in how things should be that I often acted without caution. I often fell on the canvas while he taught me how to box. I would examine my father for weaknesses or gaps in his defenses, and just when I thought I had found them, the canvas would rise again to stroke my back. I fell many times while learning to box, but the lessons I learned have served me well throughout my life. And so it was that day when I approached Felicia's apartment. The area wasn't the best, and I was a little worried leaving my Mustang there. I figured it would be okay since I could watch him from her doorstep. Felicia didn't have a car, so I couldn't tell if she was home. The only way to find out is to knock on her door. So I walked up to her door and looked through the window as I was about to knock. For seconds, that seemed endless. My hand hung in the air, neither knocking on the door nor moving my hand away until my brain exploded. Looking out the window, I saw a heavy-set elderly man. He had an angry expression and a balding head. His lips were plump and feminine, but what he did was decidedly masculine. His lips curled into a smile when he saw me through the window, but he didn't stop what he was doing. What he was doing was having sex with Felicia. She lay on her back and looked at him, so that the window through which I was watching was behind her. She didn't even know I was there. She called him darling, just like she called me. She even used the exact same tired phrase she used with me. I felt like a real fool. I took out a pen and took a card of flowers. I crossed out the part that said, "To a new beginning," and wrote, "I came, but you were too busy to make time for me." I crossed out "Love, Jerry," and wrote, "Goodbye, this time for good." I carefully placed the flowers and card on the doorstep and headed to my car. Boxing lessons came in handy. Less than 2 days after I was knocked down, I found myself at a party again. This second time, although not as devastating as the first, also left its mark on me. I won't say I became cynical or rigid, but I have never been so open or so quick to trust anyone again. No matter how hard women tried to convince me, I never gave in so easily again and never fell in love so hard again. A few years later, I met a woman and dated her for a while. She wasn't as beautiful as Felicia, but then I don't think any woman anywhere could be like that. It took her a while to break through my defenses, but she was persistent. We eventually got married and have the previously mentioned pack of would-be ladies' men. But from time to time, I would replay moments with Felicia in my mind. In some of these moments, I wondered how things could have turned out, and in others, I gritted my teeth and almost growled with hatred for the woman who broke my heart twice. My growls, although quiet, were also impotent because deep down, I knew that I still loved her and probably always would. I shook my head to clear my memory and realized she was doing the same thing. "Jerry, is that you?" she asked. "No, it's not me," I said, getting up to leave. She followed me to the door and grabbed my hand as I walked through it. "I know it's you, Jerry," she said. "You haven't changed in all these years, and I know you better than anyone on earth." "I think there is someone who knows me better," I replied sharply. "Jerry, I don't want to fight," she said. "It's been, 10 years since you left me. I just want to talk to an old friend for a few minutes. There's something I've been thinking about over and over for the past 10 years. I have my theories, but I would really like an answer. Answer to what? I asked sharply. As usual, she slowly approached me, but this time it didn't work. Then she touched me, and everything melted. All the years that had passed, the decline of her beauty and her body, none of it mattered. It was still Felicia, and the feelings I had for her came back all at once. Looking at her, the stars lit up in my eyes again, and in hers too. "What happened, Jerry?" she asked. "Why did you just leave me flowers instead of stopping by? And why did you change the message on the card? At first I thought maybe you were still mad at me and just agreed to come over to get rid of me. But I understood the message over and over again. And I'm sure you had the first one in mind when you wrote it. I was sure that maybe someone told you something about me that made you just decide that I wasn't worthy of being in your life. You broke my heart, Jerry." This made me angry. I snorted disdainfully and just looked at her. "What?" she asked. She moved us to a bench at the bus stop in front of the bar. While she pulled me to sit next to her, I was in a fog. She wrapped her arms around mine in her signature move and pressed my hand against her limp but still sizable breasts. "I assume you got married?" she asked. I nodded my head woodenly. "Do you love her the same way you loved me?" "Not even close," I said honestly. "Jerry, we were meant to be together," she said quietly. "I screwed up, you screwed up, and it doesn't matter. We're meant to be together. Have you ever thought about what could have been? Have you ever thought about what should have been?" I nodded my head. "We can still be together one way or another," she said. "We're not dead. We can still have everything we wanted. We can be together until the end, whatever you want." "What do you mean?" I said. "I'm married." "So what?" she replied sharply. "You already said you don't love her as much as you love me. I'm yours, Jerry. I've always been yours. If you give me a chance, I can explain why I do what I have to do. Just give me a chance. We can be great together. They have this thing called divorce. You don't have to stay in a situation where you're unhappy." She pressed her breasts hard against my hand again for emphasis. She then accidentally touched the front of my pants. "You're wrong, Felicia," I said. "You were once beautiful, but you're far past your prime. And I never said I loved you more than my wife. I said I don't love her the way I loved you. It's a different kind of love. She's quiet and strong as opposed to explosive and sharp. Probably the biggest difference is that I can trust her, unlike you, whom I could never trust. Of course, it was not love at first sight between us, not even from the second, but I know that it is forever." "You want me, Jerry?" she exclaimed. "You've always wanted me. And honey, you can have me. You can have me anytime. I'll stop this. I don't like it, but I have to make a living somehow, and I'm not as smart as you. I just need us to be together. I still don't understand why you left me. It's because of that jealous bitch, Katie Sanders, isn't it? She told you some lies to make you mad at me, isn't it?" I don't know how. Maybe it was her suggestion to divorce my wife or cheat on her. But the fog cleared. "No, it wasn't Katie," I replied sharply. "I wasn't in touch with her at that point. We went to different colleges and she wasn't part of my circle of friends at the time. But someone actually said something to me that really hurt me." "Who?" she asked angrily. "You," I said coldly. "I was so stupid when it came to you that I already fell in love with you again. You always had the gift of luring me and leading me down the path you wanted. Remember what you told me that night after the party? You said that I was the only man you ever loved. Of course I remember. It was true then, and it's still true now, fool. No matter what anyone says, it will always be true. You're the only man I've ever loved," she said. "I've never said this to anyone else, except for that balding old man who was having sex with you when I came to your apartment that day." I replied sharply. "You told him exactly the same thing less than 24 hours later. And it seemed much more believable since you had sex with him." "Oh my God, Jerry," she said. "I never knew you saw it. I'm so sorry. I can explain everything if you let me." "You always have an explanation, don't you?" I said. "You might as well explain nuclear fusion, and then explain the whole Higgs boson thing." "That man you saw me with was my boss," she said. I had to let him have sex with me to keep my job. Jerry, I'm not very smart, I told you. I was the worst secretary in the world, but I needed this job. I needed to support my son. Look. She took a folded piece of paper from her purse. She handed it to me, and I unwrapped it. It was the birth certificate of a boy named Jerry. Judging by his date of birth, he was about 11 years old. Don't even try, I said. I don't... His father, she interrupted. Of course not. We haven't had sex yet. Brad was the father, but he disappeared when he found out I was pregnant. He died about 7 years ago, never seeing or believing that Jerry was his son. I named mine son in honor of the only man I have ever loved. I was silent. What are you thinking about? She asked. I was just wondering how many of these birth certificates you have in your purse, I said. How many names are written on them? Only one thing, she answered sharply. Believe it or not, I really love you, fool. But I keep ruining everything. Jerry, I grew up in a trailer park. We crammed 6 people into one small trailer, and I didn't want to grow up like that. I have 2 sisters and a brother. My parents bickered and fought constantly until my dad ended up in jail for beating my mom too much. They cheated on each other so often that by the end, they didn't even try to hide it. I didn't want this life. My brother is serving a life sentence for murder during an armed robbery. Both of my sisters are dead. All 3 of us were beautiful. But watching my sisters, I realized that beauty is useless. Beauty can create problems. Everyone always wanted to have sex with me, she said. I can look at a guy and see it. So I use what I can to survive, Jerry. Even when we were in school, everyone knew you were smart. I watched you and wondered how you knew so many things. That no one else knows. I knew that you would be successful and have a good life. Then I started hearing from everyone that you liked me. At first I just thought that I would contact you and share your life, but when I got on that bus, I fell head over heels in love with you. Seriously. As for Brad, I told you the truth. He was kind of my boyfriend, Jerry. I really ignored him for you. I never used you, Jerry. I really love you. But I admit that I used Brad. It was survival, Jerry. I was a teenager. Brad was rich. If I spent time with him and let him call me his girlfriend, I could eat. We never had food in that damn trailer. At Cedar Point, I actually asked Brad, the fool, to give me money so I could spend it on you. Brad's dead, but David and a couple of the other guys he hung out with are still living in town. You can ask them. They still talk about it. I told Brad I'd do whatever he wanted for money. He told me he'd give me money, but because I was his girlfriend. That's when I told him I wasn't his anymore, and he freaked out. He told me that if I wanted money, I needed to go on a couple of rides with him, and he groped me in front of his friends. I didn't care. I just wanted to get back to you, Jerry. You can ask them about it, too. When you left and went to college without talking to me, I collapsed. I couldn't get into college. I didn't have the money to go there even if I got in. And the guy I loved didn't want to have nothing to do with me. But Brad was always there. I knew everything about sex, and believe it or not, I saved myself for you, Jerry. All of this, she gestured towards her body. All of this was supposed to be yours. Brad kept putting pressure on me, offering everything he could think of to get me into bed. He kept telling me stories about how you bought that damn Mustang and entertained every girl in our class before you left for college. He said to me that you were probably already engaged by then, what with all those beautiful girls in college. So, Jerry, I'm sorry, I gave up. He got me an apartment and got me out of that trailer. Even as we did it, I knew it was the biggest mistake of my life. I swore I'd never do it again. And I held back until it was time to pay the rent the next month. By the 3rd month, I realized that I was pregnant, and my life fell apart. After Jerry was born, I took a job as a secretary, and Al, my boss, gave me an ultimatum. It was terrible, but I had no choice. Either sleep with him or lose my job. Eventually, Al started to think we were a couple. He even divorced his wife for me, but that was something I couldn't do. I couldn't become his wife. The only person I ever wanted to marry was you, Jerry. Al liked it when I pretended to like it. He fired me a couple of times because I started just lying there like a rock and letting him do what he wanted with me. There were always new and younger girls, so I did what I wanted. that I should have. But I never meant a word of what I said. Sometimes I imagined it was you, Jerry. I know we never did it, but I always imagined it would be tender and loving, and you will not treat me like every other man I have ever known. Al died about a year ago, and I looked really hard for a job, but I have no skills, and no one wants to train me. I know I'm not as beautiful as I used to be, but that's because I had a hard life. Now my son and I live in the same damn trailer park I came from, like a vicious circle. I had no choice again, Jerry. There was silence again. I really believed her. Felicia, this is a lot to take in, I said. I need some time to think about this. Can we meet here at this time tomorrow evening? Maybe we can work something out. I'll be happy with anything, darling, she said. If only we could be together. But we've waited too long, Jerry. We could have had a family by now. Tomorrow night, I'll give you a taste of what you've been doing without all this time. The next day, I made several calls and finally got David Tyler's number. I called him, and we spent a few minutes reminiscing about old times. I then got to the point of my call. He started laughing loudly. "You're very lucky you called me," he said. "Did you know that she got pregnant and sued Brad for child support? She made him look like a child support defaulter. It was so bad that he committed suicide in a car accident. He was talking to her on the phone at the time and lost control of the car. After his death, she began to demand money from his parents to support their grandson. They demanded the right to visit, and as soon as they received the child for a visit, they did a DNA test with a cheek scraping. It turned out that the child was not even Brad's. She always blamed him for losing you. She wanted to make him pay for it. I think you were her white whale. She was obsessed with you. You were supposed to be her ticket to an easy life. I dated her a couple of times several years ago. As soon as she started telling me the same tired line about how glad she was that she had finally won me because I was the only man she had ever loved, I disappeared. I heard her use the same tired line many times with Brad. "Stay away, buddy. She doesn't even have custody of the kid anymore. Child Protective Services put him in foster care. You can't trust a word she says." After work, I went home. I didn't stop at the bar or even bother calling. My wife, the former Kathy Sanders, greeted me at the door with a long kiss, as usual. I hugged her again and just held her. "Not that I'm complaining, but what was that for?" she asked, smiling. "It's because I love you," I said. "And I love our kids and our lives. I was just thinking about what could have been." "What do you mean?" she asked. "You could have stayed single and become a rich, handsome playboy, instead of marrying me and making me have kids all the time. You could have been free to travel the world and hang out with other rich, famous playboys." Actually, I was thinking that I could end up with a lying, manipulative bitch and be absolutely miserable instead of having a warm and loving wife, a beautiful home, and 3 naughty children, I laughed. "So you've been thinking about Felicia again, huh?" she said, and her face became serious. "Should I be worried?" I laughed for a long time. "No, honey," I laughed, hugging her again. "I'm just glad I'm with you and our kids. I'm glad that what could have been didn't happen." Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.